So this next piece is a tongue-in-cheek review of our arrival in Adelaide. I've just read a book called Wild Swans, the story of three generations of a Chinese family spanning the Communist Revolution in China. Now, reading that, I am humbled by the gritty heroism of the characters involved. The daily struggles, the grinding poverty, and excruciating hardships, the like of which I have never and likely never will have to experience. It makes me feel that I have nothing to complain about in comparison. And yet my feelings of frustration with living in Australia are valid for me. I reflect. You really cannot compare suffering, can you? Suffering is indivisible. Your suffering is as traumatic for you as mine is for me. You can't compare apples and oranges. Your suffering is an apple and mine is an orange, and there's no point of comparison. I have no time for people who tell me to be thankful for what I have. Oh, things could be worse. You might be like X or Y over there. Think of the starving millions. To say that is just to say, stop complaining. It is to discount and invalidate my suffering. To compare suffering is to devalue it and to discount it and to devalue me. I do this to people all the time, of course. Australians are always discounting other people's suffering and their own suffering. It irritates me. Yes, it does. It irritates me. There were so many little things we all had to get used to again in Australia after Borneo. These are life skills which one could not learn in Borneo, especially the children. Like getting on a bus, for instance. If you've been living in Borneo, you've forgotten how to ride a bus. Firstly, passengers in Australia should always know their destination before you get on the bus, which means the driver should be confronted by a person who is at the correct bus stop. Second, the passenger must know the exact fare and preferably have the exact fare ready to satisfy the driver. Third, the passenger must be in excellent physical condition because when the bus starts, as he wobbles off towards his seat, he's likely to be thrown off balance and crack a rib as the driver changes gear. So any pilgrim from Borneo who rocks up at a bus stop without knowing where they are going, for instance, is immediately subject to the bus driver's snarl and curled lip. And he curls his lip as if to say, bloody foreigners. You then must have the correct change, know the correct fare, and which machine to put the bloody ticket in, and which way up the ticket goes in the bloody machine. So, to the reader, these may all seem, as they did to me, to be trivial offences. But if you don't know them, the bus driver will punish you by cracking your rib as he accelerates erratically through the gears as you waddle down the aisle. Now, the next little section is to do with searching for real estate. Next morning, I tried to look for some real estate agents to see if there were any cheaper apartments for Maria and my daughter. No estate agents within the vicinity. The man in the convenience store sends me to an estate agent, and almost before I can speak, she says with the unmistakable look of "Don't bother me" on her face, "Go to relearning.com.au." And I feel like saying, well, I could have done that at home. What's the bloody point in having an office here if you're just going to tell people to go to a website? But I say nothing. I don't want to get into trouble with Maria for complaining. Where's the personal touch then? There isn't any. And that's still a problem I have with Australia, and indeed with much of the rest of the world, to be fair to Australia. When you're interested in renting a property, they hand you an application form with requests for references. It's like applying for a bloody job. If I don't know anybody, well, then I don't get a place to live. I just go to the salvos or pitch my tent. Australia is overregulated. Is this really the land of the free? The individual? The independent? Here's the deal as I see it. You can't smoke here. You can't eat there. You can drink inside, but not outside. Or at least until 9 o'clock, then you have to go back inside again. If you're not 18, you can't drink at all. But you can go to war and get yourself maimed or killed for a bunch of neighbours who won't even speak to you or who don't even know you're at war fighting for them. The bus doesn't stop here. No, it stops only there. You can buy only tea here, but not juice. Do I pay now, no, or later? Do I sit here and wait, or do I carry my own food? So many regulations. It was difficult for me, but it must have been worse for the younger Nixons brought up in Borneo. The next little section is, well, it's the same really. It's also intimidating if you don't know the system and you're an outsider. I have no car or home or job, and I feel disadvantaged, a member of the underclass, intimidated by car owners, home owners, and job owners, and no owners, a KNOW. Those who are in the know are no owners. But I can't complain, or I'll be called a whinger by the locals. So many contradictions. In Australia, a warm and friendly banter culture, or are the people standoffish? We had a great time finding a successor to our car, Bluey. Bluey was our Ford Falcon when we were in Victoria and Queensland, and he served us very well for 9 years. Finding a successor to Bluey in Adelaide would turn out to be a difficult task. We got on the train at Adelaide station at a most unsalubrious place, close to Salisbury. We were going to look at a little Ford Fiesta. Noel greeted us. He looked like an Irishman, and he originally was, of course, like many Aussies. So he showed us the Fiesta, and to be frank, we weren't that impressed. It looked tatty, and it was quite hard to handle for a small car. We also noticed a Ford Falcon of roughly the same size and ilk as Bluey, but a little more modern. He was selling it for $2,000, and it looked quite good. Of course, it looked just like Bluey, and like Bluey, it ran on gas. The clincher for Maria was the power steering, less wrenching of the steering wheel. So we went home, leaving a deposit of $150 with him, and proceeded to get the rest of the money for Noel from the bank the next day. We registered the car and travelled back to Salisbury the next day and completed the deal. Noel turned out to be a retired teacher, and he was very pleased with himself that he'd retired intact and was doing his little sidelines selling cars in his retirement. We drove away and filled up with gas. As we left the station, I noticed that the mileometer wasn't working. This was a problem because the gas gauge wasn't working either. And Maria needed to know the mileage in order to work out how much gas she was going to put in the tank. So we turned around and went back to Noel, who was embarrassed. We agreed to bring it back the next day so he could replace the mileometer. Off we went again. 10 minutes later, the engine cut out. We restarted, and 2 minutes later, the engine cut out again. And then again, and then again, and then again. 5 times on the way home. We get home and we park and we leave the car, and the neighbour says, "Hey mate, what's that you got under your car?" And water was pouring out everywhere. More than a little dejected now, I phoned Noel and gave him the bad news. He came up to town and took Bluey's successor away and left us with this little runabout we were originally interested in for a couple of days while he fixed up Bluey's successor. It was fun driving around in the Fiesta, and I think Maria felt more relaxed having a car. Having a car to the urban dweller is almost now an essential part of being human. Without a car, you feel disadvantaged and rapidly develop the victim mentality. You can even develop mild paranoia, as everything seems to be so difficult to do without a car. You can come to believe everyone, including the traffic, is out to get you. It's the same identity thing that teenagers have. Teenagers need their kit today in order to feel they belong. Mobile phone, iPod, laptop. Some teenagers even claim that a car is part of the kit too. Young people will say they need a car to get a job at McDonald's. As public transport services decline in quality, a car has indeed become essential to get to work in many locations in Australia. When I was a teenager in Ireland, you worked to get the money to get the car. Now in Australia, you need the car to get to the job, to get the money. It sounds a bit Irish to me, but it works very well for the world economy. But it drives parents mad as they're constantly having to work hard to earn the money to keep up with the demands made upon them to provide kits for their offspring. We decided to try and look for a bigger place. The first problem was finding the estate agents. When I was in Brisbane 10 years previously, all the main roads were full of estate agents. So we were perplexed to find not a single one as we drove around. I couldn't believe it. We ended up going to the post office and looking them up in the yellow pages. We found one or two and set off to find them. The general attitude in the agents was to give us a printout of their properties from a website. The web had made these offices redundant. Where has the personal touch gone? As an Irishman, I find this totally reprehensible. We did find one very helpful lady in LJ Hooker's who sat us down and gazed at us with curiosity like we were retro beach bums from the 70s. It was clear by the way she handled us that she was not used to seeing human beings in this context. In other words, her office. But she came up with some very useful advice indeed. She suggested we rent an unfurnished apartment and then rent the furniture. That way we could maintain our flexibility and move at short notice without paying the high price of a furnished apartment. A very helpful lady. It was with much sadness and just a little apprehension that I abandoned the family to survive on their own in this brave new world. I had to return to Brunei. On the way home, my flight from Brisbane was delayed by 12 hours, and I was eventually set with the other passengers starting their journey in Brisbane to a hotel with food vouchers. When I got into the lift in my swanky hotel, I found that the lift didn't work. I was left there standing with my mouth falling open. How could this be? Two burly men entered the lift, casually looked at me as if to say, "Don't you know how a lift works, mate?" They then waved something at the door and the lift started. Turned out to be a plastic lift activator. I was unaware I had been given one with my room key, a security device which had to be swiped near an infrared switch to start the lift. Another new piece of technological software I had to learn to master to survive in the new millennium. The war against technology went on.